All right. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle D'Amico, and I'm the Director of Non-Credit and Public Programs here at the NYUSPS Center for Global Affairs, or CGA. The CGA is currently celebrating its 15th year of preparing global citizens. We do this through our two graduate programs, a long-standing MS in Global Affairs, and a recently launched MS in Global Conflict, Security, and Cybercrime. We also offer a variety of professional and personal enrichment courses in the areas of global affairs and fundraising, and this includes several professional certificates. We'll send out a follow-up message to all attendees, so please feel free to reach out with any questions you may have about these programs. Now to today's speaker. Dr. Christian Busch is the Director of the Global Economy Concentration here at the NYU Center for Global Affairs. He's also a visiting fellow at the London School of Economics. He's a co-founder of Leaders on Purpose and the Sandbox Network, and former co-director of the LSE's Innovation Lab. Christian is a part of the World Economic Forum's Expert Forum and has guest lectured at the Stanford Business School, Peking University, IMD, and Strathmore. His work has been published by outlets such as Entrepreneurship Theory and Practice, the Handbook of Inclusive Innovation, and IJEV, and was featured by The Guardian, Wired, among others. I can say personally that it's been an absolute delight to work with Christian since he first joined the CGA. He's one of those people who seems to defy the constraints of a normal 24-hour day, and I'm sure that's evident by his impressive bio, which I just covered. Today, Christian is going to be talking about a topic that I know he's been excited about for years, and especially since I've known him in his work at CGA, and that is on serendipity. So without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Christian.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for the wonderful introduction. And good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us for this journey that I'd love to take you on in terms of serendipity. And it'll be a mix of content, presentation, and having some wonderful voices with us who practice serendipity in their day-to-day. And so before doing that, I'd like to acknowledge that this is a time where all of us at the CGA are reflecting very deeply on the pain and grief that's with regard to long-standing racial inequality and recent horrible events, and most importantly, our privilege that many of us have and the responsibility that we have in being part of a momentum towards true equality. And that situations like COVID-19 have exacerbated those kind of inequalities. And so while everything that we'll talk about today hopefully will have a positive impact on everyone, also being very conscious of the fact that some people have very different starting points than others, and that while we work on some of these issues, what's at the same time, what we of course have to do is working really on structural issues. And I think at the CGA particularly, that is a big responsibility that we're seeing. In terms of the session today, I'd love to start with a kind of bit of a context and some of the the individual journey that's been leading to some of this content, then really kind of diving into what are some of the practices of the art and science of serendipity, and then some of the wonderful individuals that we have with us today, 5 of them who practice serendipity in their day-to-day and who will take us on their hand and really show us how serendipity can unfold. In terms of the serendipity journey itself, this has been something for a long time, in a way, both a philosophy of life and a daily practice. I've a lot of kind of, I get a lot of my kind of enthusiasm and purpose from those kind of unexpected moments that people have when they, say, oh my God, such a coincidence this, or oh my God, I didn't even know that this is possible. And that potentiality that comes with serendipity, that idea that every day our life could change for the better, every day there is some kind of meaning that we can create. And so I've been enjoying kind of developing platforms around this, being that communities and companies. But one of the things, a couple of years ago also, my inner imposter syndrome came out a little bit. And when thinking about what is the actual impact that's happening when we think about different types of issues in the world that have to be solved, I got a bit more into academia as well, trying to understand what are the patterns behind success and failure, what are the patterns behind scaling social impact, and those kind of questions. And I first thought, okay, when trying to understand impact and these kind of questions, they would be quite unrelated from the kind of cultivation of serendipity that I did in my kind of quote unquote personal life and in my practitioner life. But actually, to my absolute delights, serendipity seemed to pop up everywhere with the most successful, joyful, purpose-driven people. And so the book really is about kind of bringing together all these different examples and stories from the work over the last kind of decades. A lot of my work has been particularly in Kenya, South Africa, China, US, and UK. So it's particular focus on those countries, but it also tries to bring in other global examples and stories and really kind of dive deep into that. But also then what I found fascinating is when you dive into the research in different areas, everything from molecular chemistry to physics to management science, in a way, a lot of them are saying very similar things in terms of how we can somehow accelerate serendipity. So somehow we can set ourselves up for unexpectedness by creating some kind of momentum, by creating some kind of conditions for it. And so the book itself is really about saying, let's do like a science-based framework for how we can cultivate that serendipity. Let's learn from all the wonderful research that's already there. Let's learn from the wonderful individuals who have been doing this around the world, from the amazing social entrepreneur in South Africa, whom we see today, to the CEO of XYZ company, and really distill that together and say, what is something that we can all learn from this? But most importantly also then, how do we turn this into exercises? So how do we really develop a daily practice that allows us to have more of this? And then there's a kind of serendipity score that allows us to understand, okay, today I'm here, but maybe in 2 weeks, I've developed more of a mindset for serendipity. And so the book itself actually was also very serendipitous. It came out of a couple of years ago, a holiday I was on with a couple of friends. And at that point, I wanted to write another book on kind of integrating profit and purpose, which has been a kind of interest of mine for a long time. And I pitched the book idea to them, and I remember their faces being relatively blank, and one friend asking like, hey, Christian, do you have other ideas as well? And I was like, all right, well, this idea does not seem to fly. And so I intuitively said, well, maybe there's something around serendipity. Maybe that's something that you know, I so deeply believe in as a life philosophy, but also I've seen it work in so many different contexts. And so that night I didn't properly sleep, but I wrote down all the different pieces that I've been working on and tried to put it all together. And so that now over the last years kind of became that book. In terms of the bigger picture, of course, and why that is really important in the world we live in, is in a world that's changing so fast and where a lot of the problems are so complex, we of course need to expect the unexpected. And a lot of the problems that we need to solve, we can't know the answer in advance. We have to somehow rubber stamp towards it. And so in a way, we have to build that muscle that allows us to do that. And Hubert Joly said that beautifully, the chairman of Best Buy. He said something along the lines of, if the way you deal with the unexpected defines who you are. And I think especially at the moment, we see that a lot when we see how leaders are reacting to something unexpected, like COVID and other kind of themes that are happening, and where some of them show their real kind of, who they really are. And in a way, these kind of situations define a lot of who we are. And Best Buy had an interesting kind of example when Hurricane Maria happened a couple of years ago in Puerto Rico. And, they had a couple of stores there, and they were all kind of devastated. And essentially, the Best Buy leadership team had to make the decision, okay, do we get our people out here with private planes? Do we work with like local communities really sincerely on this? And, that would cost money. And they had to justify to their shareholders, look, this will cost money. But they did it because they said, hey, look, this is who we think we are and we have to be. And, that was the right thing to do in that moment. But also then in the mid-run, it turned out that really kind of also helped them in terms of loyalty with everyone, customers, employees, and others. So it's really one of those moments where it is the right thing to do. And also it's actually the thing that in the mid-run is something that on a lot of different dimensions makes sense. And so it's really those kind of situations we're seeing a lot at the moment as well. But it's really about how do we set ourselves up for these things. I want to show you a couple of examples. Recently, a lot of companies here, for example, you see a brewery in Cambodia, And they essentially, they used to do usual things that breweries do. But they said, okay, in times of COVID, what's important is, that people get hand sanitizers. So they turned into like a hand sanitizer production company. We see ride services, like bike ride services for seniors that turn into critical delivery services, where people say, okay, we have this infrastructure, how can we leverage this now for actually doing the right thing and solving a real problem here that needs to be solved at this point. But also you see like examples throughout kind of, different themes. This is one of my favorites, actually. It happened a couple of years ago in London. So I got a call on a Saturday morning by someone who's now who's now a good friend, and he essentially, he called up and he was like, hey, look, I just came from the Skoll World Forum, which is kind of this big social entrepreneurship conference, and all of these participants, we're all stuck in London, and we're all somehow trying to figure out how to get home, but we're all stuck here because this volcano with the unpronounceable name broke out, after cool, something like that. And it broke out, and all planes were grounded. And so Nathaniel, like all the other people, experienced the same kind of serendipity trigger, right? Or the same kind of moment, which was, okay, there's a volcano breaking out, everyone's stuck in London. But essentially he was like, okay, what can I do with this moment? And so he remembered that TED is all about, ideas, how do you turn challenges into opportunities? So he sent a couple of messages to TED and said, hey, look, how about if I organize an event that is TEDx Volcano, and that shows how we can make the best out of the situation. And so within 32 hours, he organized a full-fledged TED event, TEDx Volcano, where essentially he got amazing speakers, over 10,000 people on the recorded live stream, and essentially kind of created a lot of visibility for creating opportunity out of crisis. And so that was one of these kind of examples where someone took and connected the dots. This is another example where this is Mahindra, which is an Indian company. Their waste to energy, a lot of their projects came out of kind of serendipitous conversations between people who said, okay, maybe our company should be part of solving some real issues. And then of course, like the favorite historical example, which some of you might see so this thing on the right, I don't know who came across it. It's probably always a good sign if you haven't, but also not a bad sign if you have. Essentially, that's something where a couple of decades ago, a couple of researchers were injecting people with some medication against angina, and they realized that in the male person's participants' trousers, there was some kind of movement happening. And what would we usually do? We would either be embarrassed and would say, oh my God, this is a bad side effect, we have to somehow hide this, or you would work on a better treatment to somehow not have these kind of side effects happen anymore. What they did is exactly the opposite. They said, okay, this is unexpected, but you know what, maybe we can do something with this. And so this is how they then developed a new medication, which became Viagra. And that's actually something, things like Viagra and others, there's a couple of studies that estimate that around 50% of inventions and a lot of innovations and other things essentially emerge that way, completely serendipitous, because there's some kind of accident or something that goes wrong, or some kind of petri dishes that go into things. And based on that, you have some people who connect dots and who make something positive out of it. There's also a couple of practices we see in companies. One of my favorites is the post-mortem exercise, which is essentially the kind of practice that whenever an idea doesn't work out, that rather than just trying to hide it away and to say, oh my God, this never happened, which obviously happens in most companies and most organizations, this is the opposite. This is saying, okay, how do we celebrate the learning from what didn't work out? So we're not celebrating the failure, but we're celebrating the learning from the failure. And so in one company, for example, you would have this example of like a project manager who would stand up and who would be like, oh, we tried to develop this window screen, window glass that wouldn't reflect the lights. And we tried to develop this, but we realized that nobody would pay a lot of money for something that just doesn't reflect the light. So usually you would just put it away. But he said, look, we learned from this, next time we think about the market differently and so on. Then there was someone in the audience who was like, hey, look, but have you considered what this would mean for solar? because the technology seems to be really good for absorbing energy. And so that's how part of their solar projects emerged. And that's, again, how serendipitously that happened. And one of the things that I found most fascinating about like all of these kind of examples and like all the kind of like everything, you know, day-to-day examples that all of us have, like, you know, in my life, for example, most of my relationships, most of my romantic relationships were completely serendipitous, right? You run into someone in the coffee shop, you quote unquote, like watch each other's laptops when you go to the restroom, and then you get to a conversation, you connect dots between your interests, and then you do something with it. So you essentially, there is that kind of thing where you're turning some kind of unexpected potential moments into some kind of positive outcome. And so that's really something, one of the things that is really at the core of this work, is to say that serendipity is not just something that happens to us as like a passive thing, like blind luck does, right? Blind luck is, I'm born into a wealthy, or not necessarily wealthy, I mean, people might be quite unhappy in wealthy families, but I'm born into a very loving family. Like, this is blind luck, right? I didn't really work for that. But then smart luck is about saying, I really did something with this. And so serendipity then really is not like just something that happens to us, but it's a process of seeing and spotting some kind of serendipity trigger or some kind of dot, and then essentially connecting the dots and doing something with it. Like in all these examples, like if you take something like Viagra or so, like there is this unexpected thing happening in the trouser, but then we're doing something with it. We're connecting the dots, but also we need the tenacity to actually follow through with it. It's not enough to just say, oh, okay, I realize that this movement is happening in the trouser, and this is a problem that a lot of people in the world have. I mean, it's great to connect those dots, but without then actually going into the actual production of it and doing something with it, nothing would really happen, right? And so this is really about saying, hey, this is a process that allows to connect those dots. One of the things that's of course really interesting here is that most people miss serendipity all the time, in terms of they might miss the trigger, not see it, they might miss connecting the dots, or they might not have the tenacity to actually do something with it. And that's obviously most interesting always when looking at kind of counterfactuals or things where what could have happened. Like, I mean, if you think through that, like when you were in the supermarket and you ran into this kind of extremely cute person and you didn't say anything, and then you walked home and you were like, oh my God, like, could I have talked to that person? Could I have, because you maybe seemed like, it seemed like that person would also have been interested, or in any other situation, this kind of moment of, oh, what could have been if I would have taken the other door here. And so that is something we can also observe in terms of the, in history, where if you take something like papain, the enzyme, where a couple of decades ago, two researchers approximately at the same time injected rabbits with some kind of enzyme to see what happened. And they saw that like rabbits' ears flopped and something happened. One of them didn't do anything. So both of them saw the trigger, both of them saw something happening, but only one of them kind of developed it further, saw at some point and developed and paved the whole kind of stream of how this can actually be really helpful for things like arthritis and everything else, because it does something to the human body. And so that developed into a beautiful kind of Nobel Prize winning type research stream versus the other thing where nothing really happened. And so it's kind of this like seeing essentially the kind of different types of life histories that are unfolding. And that's something that's obviously really interesting in a way where if we think about our own lives and how many different potential lives we could live, to see these kind of different counterfactuals and the potentiality in those and how that could unfold. One thing that I've had the pleasure to learn during that kind of journey, I mean, I've learned so much, and I'm learning so much, and everything, by the way, you know, I mean, this is one of these situations where there's so many people in this room virtually who are so smart and who have so brilliant ideas, and yet I'm kind of here putting a presentation there. So if there's any kind of ideas and things where you feel you want to be part of that journey, please do send them over. Let's make that a conversation, because I feel there's so much to learn around this, and nobody has figured it out, right? Like everyone is kind of like trying to figure, like bring pieces of it together. But one of the things that I learned is, for example, like questioning what does it actually mean to have a positive outcome, in the sense of, that is of course true in terms of when you think about things like social impact or something, but in terms of like relationships, for example, where if you think about something like, I remember the first time I handed in like the first manuscript to the publisher, And they were like, well, you know, this sounds all nice, but do you have any love stories in there? And I was like, look, like I'm kind of like, you know, this like, you know, 35-year-old single guy. I'm not sure I'm the right person to talk about love stories. And they were like, well, but look, like it would be nice to have some kind of love stories there. And so right after that meeting, I met an ex-partner of mine who's now a very, very close friend of mine. And I asked her, so like, do you know of any love stories? And she was like, well, our story. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, what, like, I mean, we're not together anymore. Like there's no quote unquote success here. There's no kind of positive outcome here. And she was like, well, look, I mean, you and I, when we met, like, you know, we met in a Starbucks. It was kind of completely like coincidental how we got talking, how we then kind of, you know, developed our relationship out of it. But in a way, we both put each other like emotionally and professionally on wonderful paths. And we were such important parts of our lives and are to this day, that actually that kind of story is a love story that ended in something beautiful. And so it made me think about things like, okay, what is success of relationships? What is success of all these different types of things that I would have taken for granted before that? And so I think the beauty of serendipity then also becomes, hey, like, what is almost like the time when we look at it, that a lot of times it might have been bad luck first, but then actually becomes good luck at some point. I mean, like I faced bankruptcy at some point with one of our companies. It seemed like real bad luck in the moment, but in the long run, it turned out to be a really good thing probably for everything that was related to it, and to really kind of readjust everything that we did and so on. So really this idea of it depends on when we look at it and how we look at it to do that. There's a lot of wonderful kind of social experiments, and I'd love to kind of soon go to our wonderful kind of quote unquote panelists. So I'll keep this short, but I think one of them I want to highlight, because to me this has really been at the core of a lot of that kind of work, which is that they did this kind of social experiment where they, Robert Weissman in the UK, who did a wonderful book on luck, and he in his kind of other research also essentially took someone who self-identified as very lucky and one who self-identified as very unlucky. And they told him, okay, okay, do something very simple, like walk down the street, go into the coffee shop, grab a coffee and sit down next to the counter. That's it, like nothing else. It's a very simple setup. What they didn't tell them was that there were hidden cameras across the street. There was a 5-pound note in front of the door of the coffee shop. And then in the coffee shop, there would only be 4 tables, like 3 would be actors. And then the 4th one would be kind of like this super successful businessman right next to the counter sitting there. And so now the lucky person walks down the street, you know, sees the 5-pound note, picks it up, goes inside, orders the coffee, has a nice conversation with the barista, sits next to the businessman, has a wonderful conversation with the businessman, that's it. Now, the unlucky person walks down the street, steps over the 5-pound note, goes inside, grabs the coffee, sits next to the businessman, the other person's left, and essentially, you know, ignores the businessman, that's it. Now, at the end of the day, they asked the 2 people who had exactly the same situation, how was your day? And so one, you know, the lucky person says, well, it was amazing. You know, I made 2 new friends. I found money in the streets. And, you know, we don't know if maybe some opportunity came out of it, but obviously it would be very, it wouldn't be unexpected at all, right? If there would have been some nice opportunity out of it. The unlucky person only says, well, nothing really happened. And that's actually something I've seen a lot in my other kind of work as well, that in a way, the way we frame the world and the way we look at things, and I think Marlon, who's today with us, is fantastic at this in terms of how do we reframe our reality in a way that makes us see these things, that makes us see, for example, resources that we would usually try to search for, being that money or something else, and rather try to understand what do we already have and how can we see that differently. And we'll dive into that in a second. But as I mentioned earlier, I think all of these kind of things we'll talk about now in terms of the actual practices of serendipity and how we can manifest it in our own lives. I think like being really conscious of structural constraints, that some are more privileged than others, and more importantly also that is really kind of different types of base levels of serendipity depending on which communities we're in and so on. And so that one of our core roles as leaders, I feel, is to create the kind of social opportunity spaces where people can have more of this. So it's not enough to just put someone or say, okay, great, like you got a scholarship to a great school. no, it's also about having then like a social opportunity space with people around one, with whom one can reflect about new encounters, with whom one can really develop opportunities and so on. So really thinking holistically about how do we think about themes and serendipity base levels in terms of those more holistic things. Now, without further ado, I'd love to dive into some of the practices. There's obviously quite a few, but I'd love to highlight some that some of our wonderful panelists today are involved in. One of my favorites actually, and that's someone in London who's a wonderful entrepreneur there, Ollie Barrett. And what he does is constantly he's setting hooks. So he's essentially, whenever someone asks him, so what do you do? You know, this dreaded question at a conference or at a virtual call or something, he answers that question by mapping an opportunity space. So he would say something like, well, at the moment I'm in education, but I recently started reading into philosophy, but what I'm really excited about at the moment is XYZ. And so now what he's doing is he's putting 3 potential hooks out there where someone could be like, oh my God, such a coincidence. I just started like with philosophy in XYZ, like, let's talk more about this. And so the point here is that in a way, if we just say one thing, like there's not much potentiality that could happen in terms of coincidence, but if we give a couple of potential dots, the other person can connect the dots for us and can somehow potentially spot that coincidence. That is also true for events. One of the things is, so I've worked with wonderful people who, for example, might not have had the kind of social capital where they have easy connections to people. And one of the idea was to say, okay, how can we help you, or not necessarily help you, but how can we work together to essentially create those kind of connections? And so one way was to set event hooks where they would go to an event, let's say at NYU or LSE or something, and then there would be this amazing speaker and 400 people in the audience. And then as soon as the speaker would stop, they would be the first one like jumping up. I mean, not too much, but like in a way visibly standing up so that nobody can ignore it. And then essentially framing the question around saying, thank you so much for this inspiring speech. So focusing completely on the speaker, but then saying, as someone who recently went through XYZ transition, I was just curious what you would advise for XYZ. Now, what a lot of times happens is the speaker like gets interested in that person who asked the question, but more importantly, out of 500 people, there's always 5 or 6 people who would come afterwards to the person who asked the question saying, my God, such a coincidence. I recently went through such a transition as well. Like, let's talk. Or, oh my God, my brother recently did XYZ and maybe we can plug you into this. Whatever it is. The point is that we created an opportunity space with a very simple question that didn't make it about ourselves, but it gave a little bit of a hunch of how people can see how that overlaps. There's a lot of other ways, of course, the way we ask questions. Do we ask, what do you do? Or do we ask, what's your state of mind? What are you currently interested in? And other things that really open up that space. But also one of the things that I've really enjoyed is Cara, who's a wonderful entrepreneur based in Los Angeles. And what struck me about her is how she really kind of dives into that question of how we can use curiosity and playfulness and gratefulness for creating more serendipity in our life. And Cara has had a wonderful kind of journey where she's worked a lot with companies and other organizations, inventing things and coming up with innovations. And I'd love to welcome her to the stage to tell us about her secret of how we can turn kind of things that could potentially be anxiety enhancing, right? I mean, ambiguity and uncertainty, I think all of us get anxious about it. And then the question is, how do we turn that into being an adventure, magic, or something else positive? And so, Cara, we'd love to welcome you to the stage, and thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. And such an honor to be here. And congratulations, Christian, on the book. Yeah, I actually started my serendipity journey by consulting for Fortune 100 companies and helping them to innovate. And one of the things that I discovered was that playfulness, curiosity, and openness actually led to new ideas. And I was working all over the world, helping companies create new ideas and new products. And I realized I wasn't doing that in my personal life. So I started an experiment where I decided to bring in more adventure, curiosity, and playfulness into my personal life to see what would happen, to see if I could apply those corporate principles to get unstuck. And as you mentioned, really building a gratitude practice, building out curiosity, and building out my life almost as a 90-day experiment. Every 90 days at a time led to a completely different path. So it started with actually a one-way ticket to India, where I convinced 90 people to write 90 adventures for me to do while I traveled by myself. And basically what that did was it took me out of the daily practice of having to figure out what I was doing each day. So every day I would pick a card. So it could be something like ask a stranger for a mantra. It could be, you know, speaking of relationships, find the happiest couple around and ask them the secret to love. So I was doing all of these things, and what it started to do was to spark this different way of living where every day became an adventure. And it started a way of going through my life of thinking about doing things as 90-day experiments. Because I think, especially in the corporate world, it's really easy to focus on outcomes and doing a project. And what I found was whenever I started to do something as a 90-day experiment, it allowed me to be more playful with it, and allowed me to be more open, and it allowed me to almost create a game. So if I was just doing something for 90 days, if I was just trying something new, I had a much more open attitude. And a big part of that was really about getting curious. And asking a lot of questions and being curious with myself as well, especially, I think, as you mentioned, Christian, when you get uncomfortable, because being in that space, like in that arch you talked about, there is some discomfort of the unknown and living a life where you're not on the beaten path, you know, you're sort of trying new things. And there is discomfort. And one of the things that helped me with that discomfort within the experiment was taking an experiment mindset. And then also this practice of thank you. So I practice saying thank you multiple times through the day. And a lot of people talk about a gratitude practice, and that's been scientifically proven to shift the brain and how we look at things. And I used to do that every night, and I still do it every night. I write down 10 things I'm grateful for every night. And I found that as I went through the day and I'd be uncomfortable in a situation, looking for things that I could say thank you for, even if it's thank you for the blue sky, or thank you for this interesting person who's crossed my path, or thank you for a new perspective that I can get curious about, would really help get me back into the present moment, so that I could then, as you talked about, not just connect the dots, but collect new dots. And I think as you talk about collecting more dots means there are more dots to connect. So yeah, it's really helped to transform kind of how I live my life, and bringing more serendipity in. So I would meet new people, I would have different ideas, I would question my own beliefs, you know, really just by being willing to say thank you and being willing to kind of live life in 90-day experiments and try new things.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Cara. And I remember you told me that wonderful story where I think it was on New Year's Eve or so, where you know, your flight got canceled and you were like, oh my God. But you know, most of us would probably then have been like, okay, let's, like, I'm gonna be like in a really bad mood for the rest of the day now. But you essentially tried to just say, look, I can still be thankful for a lot of other things that are in my life. And then you got into this Uber, and then you had that conversation with the Uber driver, who then like essentially provided you with exactly that videographer that you needed at that time. And so it's kind of that moment where, by not shutting down to essentially saying, oh my God, like everything is bad at this point because XYZ didn't work, essentially you opened yourself up for something new. And I really appreciated that about you, how you kind of in a way, like look at life this way and turn that into that. So thank you so much for that kind of inspiration. Which also nicely links us to Daniele, who is, I don't know if we, it might have been a thing with the login, so we'll get come to it later, but Danielle has been a wonderful force of nature in my life, and so when she pops up, we'll talk about it. But Danielle is the kind of person who, you know, we actually, I was on a panel at a conference thing close to where she lived, and we just wanted to grab a coffee, and she essentially, you know, we were just saying, okay, why don't we try to sneak her into the conference? So we snuck her into the conference, and then the speaker dropped out, of one of the panelists dropped out, and jokingly we suggested maybe Danielle could be part of the panel, and somehow, you know, she ended up on that panel, and she kind of just made it happen. She rocked it. And so she's the kind of person who, oh, there she is, wonderful, hey Danielle. And so she's the kind of person who just like makes it happen, whatever situation, whatever crises, where everything doesn't work out. And I had appreciated her already a lot before that, but I think that kind of moment, Danielle, where you were like, where we were in that room where it was like, okay, we need another panelist, can you just join in here? That was really kind of fantastic. And so Danielle has had a wonderful journey, in policy and doing policy research. She was at the Dutch Ministry for Foreign Affairs. So she founded her own company, Eat Well, is working for Oxford Strategy Group, and has been an all-round superstar. And so, Danielle, I was very inspired by how you told me a couple of stories of how you essentially, in moments of crisis, still somehow there was something coming out of it. And I feel like, especially in moments like at the moment where moments can feel very dire and that is the end of it, like how that can still a lot of times turn, like how bad luck can turn into good luck. And so I would love to welcome you to the stage, Danielle, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for your nice words. And hi, everyone. Very, very happy to be at today's event. First of all, I'm very impressed by how your book came together and also the serendipitous timing with which it's released. So congratulations. And yeah, the serendipity story I'm about to share, it has always served, or has since served, if you will, as my kind of rock bottom lifeline. In that indeed, when things feel bad or difficult or unlucky, I think very much of myself on that train station, which is part of the story. And whenever I visualize that, I just know that whatever is happening in that moment, however chaotic that feels, there will be a moment in the future time when I can reconnect the dots. So I'll just tell you guys the story, and hopefully it will resonate with times we've all felt like we were at rock bottom, but actually later we're able to reconnect the dots. So this happened 5 years ago. It was my first traineeship out of college, and I was very eager to see what I could contribute to the world of work, and I was ready to work at my absolute hardest, as many of us probably tend to when we dip our first toes in the real world after college. So I sadly had what I then thought was misfortune of landing in a pretty toxic team environment. There was a team where right after I arrived, there had been a leadership change, and ever since, about a third of the staff had recently quit or put themselves on long-term sick leave. So there was massive understaffing and just a lot of stress in the team. So one evening, after I had really stayed quite some bit overtime, and I'd been delaying my travel plans to get things done, I'm on my way out of the office, and my boss had one of his regular tantrums. He was shouting and like throwing paper clips through the office, which kind of bounced through all the walls. So yeah, it was a heated evening. The whole team ended up staying overtime to help resolve his mood. And I then, when that was finally done, I rushed to the train station, but missed my train by literally 20 seconds. And I just remember myself on that platform so vividly, where I'm kneeling in a dusty corner, and I just felt so defeated, both angry and just this deep self-doubt. You give everything for a job, and you're not being appreciated. So moreover, it was a time in my career, a first job where I had so little reference. So it felt like absolute rock bottom. I didn't think I was ever gonna be able to work again successfly. So then, as I'm there in that corner, I see an acquaintance walking onto the platform, and he's someone who works for a well-known organization in town in the same field. And so I asked how he was doing, and he's very excited. He's telling me about this very high stakes project that had just landed on his team's desk, and that they would need a staff member actually very urgently to add to the team. And he asked if I know someone by any chance. So I said I did, and next Tuesday I had an interview myself. And the next Friday, I was offered the job. And this became one of the most rewarding jobs I've ever had in terms of team learning and subsequent doors that it opened. It's really been, I would say, the foundation of my career since. So yeah, it's very much that moment, that dusty corner on the train station, that sort of represents rock bottom to me, but it also represents serendipity at work. And whenever, things feel bad, feel difficult, feel very unlucky, I bring that image back, and I really, refine the confidence that there will be a moment in time where I can reconnect those dots. So that's the story I shared for the book, and thank you for allowing me to add it to all the beautiful voices in there, especially in these times. Again, I felt this mindset has been a real source of resilience, and yeah, I trust it can be an inspiration for people everywhere, hopefully.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Danielle, and I think especially also I know that we have some of our amazing students on the call today who, at the moment, I mean, there might be internships that didn't go through, or, kind of plans that somehow were laid out and now they don't. And it's really something, I mean, if there's one key learning that I felt like is in wonderful journeys such as yourselves and of a lot of other like extremely successful people is that one door closes and three others at some point open up, even if they don't immediately open up, and really kind of having that trust into it and that it will happen if we really kind of, if we keep the momentum. And I think Yusuf was with us on the call today from Tanzania, calling in from Tanzania. He's also talking about the bicycle metaphor there, I think, and I think that holds very true there. So thank you so much, Danielle, for being with us. It's very much appreciated. And which is a nice link to our next wonderful guest, which is Marlon Parker, who's a very dear friend of mine from Cape Town in the Cape Flats. We've been having wonderful conversations ever since we met, I think, a very long time ago. Like, I mean, it feels like, time is relative nowadays, and like, I have no idea anymore where, when, what happens, but I know that Marlon has been a very dear friend. We've been on a joint journey of trying to understand how, especially in very challenging situations and very challenging contexts, how can we, in those contexts, create hope, create innovation, create tangible kind of impact. And so Marlon has been one of the most inspiring people that I've come across. I mean, he developed an organization called Reconstructed Living Labs, which has over 100,000 people who went through their programs, low income education programs across Sub-Saharan Africa and across the world. Coming out of the Cape Flats, an extremely inspirational program, and we've learned a lot from Marlon. And so Marlon, I'm excited to have you with us, and would kind of love to welcome you to the stage. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Christian, and again, congratulations. So excited about the book. So, now I can say, now I know people that write books, right? So I'm very happy. But again, thank you also for Danielle and Kara for sharing your stories. I think it's so inspirational. I'm going to go quickly, to last year, I was finding myself in the Valley. So being in Silicon Valley, and, then ended up lunchtime, and they asked me, Marlon, do you want some lunch? And I said, well, I only eat once a day. And they're like, oh my word, that's so progressive, right? You do intermittent fasting, We didn't know that it's caught on in Africa. And I'm like, intermittent fasting. I'm like, no, I eat once a day because I grew up poor. There was only one meal a day. So apparently by reframing it now, all of a sudden, it's a very progressive thing. And I think that leads me to the one thing about serendipity mindset is this idea of reframing. And when you work in conditions where there's a lot of socioeconomic challenges, a lot of things around growing up in South Africa in apartheid with racism, and I know it's currently quite high on the agenda, how do you begin to reframe your environment so that it can become a place of possibility? And if there's one lesson that we've learned with our labs, we are in the business of hope. We want to make hope contagious, and hope means having a certainty in today and an expectation in tomorrow. And when you want to create an expectation for tomorrow, you need to create opportunities. And I'll use a little example of our labs and how we began doing this. In the early days, you have this idea, you want to create this, you want to do something that's going to create an impact. But of course, we didn't have the resources. And one of the things that we learned very quickly to do was to, instead of looking at what we did not have, so instead of focusing on the limitation of resources, we would rather amplify what we have or the community assets. So don't focus on the limitation, but amplify on what you have. And sometimes what you have could be much more than what you thought you would need. And one of the early examples for us was when we had to create a little training program. We wanted to provide people with digital skills. And we said, this is what we're going to do, but we had no computers. Now, I mean, how can you run a digital skills program with no computers? So immediately the team started thinking, oh, we need 10 computers, you know, we need a computer lab, we need connectivity. And they started thinking about budgeting of what it's going to cost. And immediately once we identified their budget, we said, okay, that's good. But now let's look at what is essential to what we need. Well, we need computers. Do we have computers? No. Do we have money for computers? No. But do we know people who have computers? Yes. And all we did, we started identifying, but we actually know a lot of people who have computers or laptops. And we started using it at a time when they are not using the computers. So we were able to facilitate start our digital program by providing people with skills so that they would have hope, so that they can participate in a marketplace. And what started off as a simple experiment 10 years ago, today, Christian, is now over 200,000 people. I need to rectify you there. But fundamentally, it's allowed us to start leveraging what we have. And the minute you have the ability to reframe your situation, it means that you can start to redefine what you are doing, and that allows you to reposition yourself. And when you are able to reposition yourself, that's when you can seize the opportunity and seize the moment. And that is what serendipity is really about. And for us, it's been like that in the beginning, and we still do that. You know, whenever there's partnerships or opportunities that comes our way, we never look at what we don't have. We always amplify what we have, the strengths of the people, because your greatest investment that you can ever make is investing in people. And that is what serendipity mindset means for us. It's about reframing.
Thank you so much, Marlon, for sharing. And I feel, you know, I will never forget the time when we spent more time in the Cape Flats, because, you know, that kind of idea of how you look at an old garage and you say, this is not an old garage, this is a training center. Or this is not a quote unquote former drug dealer, this is a potential teacher. And by seeing the potentiality of potential things or potential people, like you in a way also make people believe it themselves, right? And without kind of trying to push it on someone. And that kind of was a beautiful journey.
And one simple thing that we did, we don't use the word beneficiaries. We actually, instead of calling someone a beneficiary, which creates an expectation, we call them community experts. If someone has gone through the complexities and the challenges of problems that they face on a day-to-day basis, it actually makes them an expert, which means when you work with them, they can actually contribute, create, and sometimes solve their own problems, which you've seen all the time. So that reframing is such a powerful tool, and yeah, definitely excited about that.
Marlon, which makes me think we should do a whole hour where we interview you, I think, because I think there's so much learning in there, especially also, you know, how we see now how international organizations learn from your approach. You know, if you're, let's say you're a bank where you would usually have to let people go because you might want to close your subsidiaries, or you might want to close your spaces. With your approach, essentially what you're saying, okay, you used to be kind of a worker, a cashier, but now maybe you become a financial trainer. Or, hey, this is an old space where we used to hand out cash, but maybe that is a financial training center. And I think there's so much in this approach to learn from for everyone around the world. And so thank you so much for sharing that kind of insights. And we'll and definitely build more on this in future as well. Thank you so much for being with us. And that beautifully links us to our next panelist, Yusuf, who is R-Lab's leader in Tanzania, in Iringa. And Yusuf is with us. We connected based on the introduction by Marlon. And I talked with Yusuf and I was just like, wow, like that kind of positive energy. And again, I think a lot of times what I've seen in my own life as an entrepreneur and in general is that people discount optimism, right? People discount when people go in because they say, oh, like XYZ might be you know, overly optimistic and so on, so on, so on. So, but I think Marlon and Yusuf, what you've been shown is it's not about being naively optimistic. It's about being rationally optimistic. It's about seeing what it is in a context, seeing like objectively things that are not going well, but also saying, okay, what could we subjectively still change here? And I think Yusuf, you've been doing that wonderfully in Tanzania as well. Very welcome to the stage. You've been very active, obviously, at University of Dar es Salaam and University of Iringa and others, and now running RLabs in Tanzania. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Christian. Sorry, my light seems to be not okay, but I will just speak. First of all, congratulations upon this milestone. I look forward to reading the book. Yeah, my name is Yusuf. I've been with RLabs for the past 8 years. And for me, how it started, just a brief story about my life. I had this desire to do something in the community to help young people who don't have hope, but I didn't know how to start. And then one day I met Marlon doing this kind of stuff. And that's how I realized, oh, things are possible, because I was kind of stuck. I didn't know what to do, but I had this desire to do something. And then I met Marlon and said, things are possible, we can do it. And then I started learning from Marlon and the team in South Africa. And we had a team here in Tanzania. We had some people from Finland. And that's how we started the journey here in Tanzania. And we started RLabs in Tanzania. And I'll just mention a few examples where I've seen this concept work. A few years ago, like 4 years ago, we are kind of stuck as an organization. We felt we needed to do something more for the young people. We needed to give them practical skills, but we didn't have a workshop. So what we had was 10 wooden poles from a neighboring school. And we said, yeah, we can start with this. So we put them, in place, and we waited, and we're like, yeah, something is going to happen, but we didn't know how it was going to happen. And we wanted to build a workshop for carpentry, for machinery, and electrical. And as we talk now, the workshop is running. We've been able to raise over $25,000, and it's producing furniture, producing metalwork, and there are young people learning there. And when I look at this, I'm like, oh, wow, this is interesting how it all started. And there are many such stories. So I was talking to Christian that, for me, it's like.
Yusuf, I think we lost you there. It might be the internet connection. I hope we'll be back in a second with you. In the meantime, so thank you so much for now for sharing. As usual, we need to expect the unexpected, like a internet breakdown. But I'm sure Yusuf will be back with us in a second. It gives us a beautiful opportunity to bring in Uzoma. Uzoma has been a dear friend with whom I've been working on kind of ideas around how technology and serendipity are related. And Uzoma has been the CEO, or he was the CEO of Diamond Bank, one of the largest banks in Nigeria, and which is now part of Access Bank, and now runs a really cool new organization where he kind of essentially accelerates serendipity with technology. And Uzoma, thank you so much for being with us. And it's been a real pleasure to talking with such a beautiful mind. So thank you for being here, Uzoma.
Oh, thank you, Christian. I'm honored to be on this. It's great, and I remember the first time that we met for breakfast. Well, we didn't have breakfast; we just had coffee and a lot of conversation. And before we knew it, I think we had solved the whole problem. It was great because, and I think, and that serendipity mindset wasn't. I didn't realize it until we had that conversation, and you begin to look at the things that have happened in your life and think, wow. And I know one of the things that we try to do is how we use technology to transform people's life. But one thing that we do appreciate now, it's like when you have the right environment and you can capture information and you can capture data, and you begin to see things that you would never have seen with your own eyes, but you can go back and look at the data and think, wow, why are people doing what they're doing? Is there a reason? Because you develop a product or service and you find people are using it differently. And sometimes in the real world, it's difficult to actually capture that unless you have a system that can do it and see it in many permutations that you never have seen it. And it just leads to the story that, that I shared with you where, we had this, like in Nigeria, there's a group savings scheme that people traditionally had been there for ages before I was born, called a susu. And that's where people come together, 3, 4, 5 people, and every month they put money together, they commit to put money together, and then one person gets the pot for the month, and the next month another person gets the pot. And what that is good for is that if you have a big capital investment to make, it means that you have access to it from a group of people that you trust, and then you can use it and then also contribute. And we thought to ourselves, with 3 million mobile users on our platform, if we could create this type of structure, digitize it, right, we would add value to our customers, because this is the type of saving that is done at the lowest level, at the bottom of the pyramid, and right at the top of the pyramid. And we have customers, especially women, who actually do this every day. And I asked my wife, I said, if we created this solution, is it something that you would do, and would you pull your friends? And she said, yes, she would do that. And so we set about, and I said to the team, I think this is something that we could do that nobody's doing. It's adding more value, and it's showing that we're more of a lifestyle organization and not just a financial institution. And so we put this together, we launched it, and it was wonderful. But what we did as well, we just said, what if people just wanted to do it by themselves? And it was, this was not in the script. This was the last minute. And we could do that because it was technology. Technology allows you to be flexible and change immediately. So we threw that in, and then we waited. And 3 months later, we're looking at the numbers, and we're saying, hey, why is the personal savings doing much better than the group funding? And let's dive, and that's something we would have missed normally, and people do that. And then let's go and ask some questions. Let's find out why people are doing that. And it was so obvious, but it was so obvious, and we would have missed it if we hadn't actually done it in an environment which you could see, you could capture them. You could go and ask people and ask them, hey, why are you using personal savings? And what they said was, a savings account is completely different, because when you put your money in a savings account, you can see it, it is there, right? And you also have to remember to do it every month sometimes, but it is there. Now, with this personal save, it hides it away. So you don't actually see it so it takes money from your account every month, and then you don't see it until maybe 6 or 8 months later. And that's exactly what we wanted. We wanted something that we could keep away, that we couldn't just jump at. It was not as accessible as a normal savings account. And that was that aha moment. I'm thinking, why didn't we think of this before? This is what people wanted to do. And for us, and that's that serendipity mindset means that you capture everything, and that's the beauty about technology, and that's the beauty about digital. It allows you the opportunity to capture. Nothing is wasted. No data is wasted. And some of the wonderful speakers here have spoken. It's like you look at everything, the thing that worked and the thing that didn't work, and why it didn't work is that there's an absolute reason. And so that's why now in my new venture, Sparkle, that's what we do. Data is everything. We're not even I don't call ourselves like a financial digital bank. We're a data. What we do is collect data, and we take your data and give it back to you as insights. And so we're creating that moment of, I bet you didn't know this about your business. Aha, this is what my customers do. And that's that mindset. And so, thank you very much for, opening my mindset to that, and allowing me to actually do this now in a more exciting platform.
Well, thank you so much, Uzoma, for sharing this. And also, in a way, I think something we've seen a lot in our own lives, right? In terms of that idea that if we don't have a fixed plan, but we have a plan, but at the same time are open to the unexpected, that gives us a sense of direction, but we have to see what others actually chip in. So thank you so much for sharing, Uzoma. I know we're now on time, and I know, I obviously appreciate everyone's in the audience is extremely busy. Those of you who have to drop off, thank you so much for joining us. But of course, we have Yusuf and Matan, who are amazing kind of individuals who will share their practices, Serendipity Bombs, and Yusuf his story, and then we'll wrap it up. So we'll do around 10 minutes longer, and then we will kind of hopefully all be serendipitous. So this is nicely linking us to the next speaker, which is Matan, who's a dear friend of mine here in New York, who has inspired me a lot when it comes to how to think about serendipity. And one of the things that I've loved about him is he talks a lot about setting serendipity bombs. And so Matan, if you want to share with us, welcome. And Matan, by the way, he's the founder of Ophelia, and he's also an adjunct professor at Columbia University. So he's an absolute brain in his own ways. So thank you so much, Matan, for being with us.
Thank you so much, Christian. One of my favorite things about being invited to be on this panel was that I think our discussion of serendipity actually started years ago due to a random blog post that I wrote in 2013 on this concept of designing for serendipity. That I had a conversation with a friend, and I thought, oh, it's interesting that some people get luckier than others, as a topic that you've mentioned here a few times now, and you've explored in much further depth. It was a new idea for me. So at the time I was writing a lot of blog posts, and I thought this seems like an interesting thing to explore. And I posted it on Medium, and I didn't exactly expect anything to come of it. But now 7 years later, here I found myself, speaking about this. And my background around serendipity has to do with entrepreneurship and the opportunities that you get as an entrepreneur, kind of the random little, very unlikely things that might happen, and how you can make those things more likely to happen. And I remember, my first exploration around this came from the idea of AI and exploration versus exploitation algorithms. So there's this question of what's the right percentage of, exploiting a formula or an algorithm that works versus exploring totally random new things. And so I thought, well, in my own time, how much of my time do I want to spend on things that I know are going to be helpful and productive and get me towards my goal, versus how much of my time do I want to allocate to things where I have no idea if they're actually going to pan out or if they're going to help me get somewhere. And I came up with the 80-20 rule, like the Pareto principle kind of thing, because it seemed good enough. And so starting, when I first started my first company, I would spend at least 20% of my time doing things where I didn't really know if they were going to help me hit my goals. Things like grabbing random coffees with people who would reach out, or proactively, at least earlier in my career, reaching out to people that I looked up to, people where, I attended one of their workshops or one of their classes or watched one of their sets of videos online, and I would just send them an email and say, I really appreciated what I learned from them and I'd love to buy them coffee. And of course, the thing is, many of these things didn't pan out. As you mentioned, this concept of a serendipity bomb. The idea of like a serendipity bomb is you're setting thousands of little, essentially traps, and they're really bad bombs because most of them don't ever pan out. But if you set literally thousands of them, well, every once in a while, one of them will, and you'll start to, feel like you're very lucky because you don't notice the things that don't work out, right? Because every once in a while, one of them does. So things like this were reaching out to people I looked up to just grab coffee to see what would come of it. Writing a lot of these blog posts. The fact that I'm teaching at Columbia actually was a result of one of these things. Like if I trace it back, it's this random connection I made on this random day, which led to this conversation, which led to this thing. And then years and years later, having the opportunity to teach a class there. I do a monthly email update to some of my close friends, which, many of my friends are familiar with. And it's really just, here are the things that are going on in my life right now. Here are some things that I've learned. Here are some questions or some asks that I might have. And I've found firsthand that a lot of really interesting, spontaneous things come out of that. I know, Christian, in your case, at least a few times you've responded to that email update and saying, hey, I'm actually going to be in New York City, next week or next month. We should meet up. And that's part of the reason why I was doing these things, was like, I have no idea, people might not remember necessarily to like shoot me an email when they're coming to New York, but if I just sort of tell people, hey, here's what's going on in my life, and I stay top of mind, it allows for the possibility for, serendipity and things like that to happen. So yeah, I just wanted to share some of those things that I've found have been helpful habits as an entrepreneur. And
So
thanks
thank you
again
so
for
much,
having me.
Matan.
Congrats on the book.
Thank you so much, Matan. And just to confirm, right, I received 2 days ago again an email of yours, and like serendipitously, I had just met someone a couple of weeks ago who might have had an apartment in Williamsburg where you're looking, and so it's kind of, and you mentioned that in the email, and so it might actually be, you know, like, so it's kind of again these things where if hopefully you find an apartment in Williamsburg, because one of us might have run across someone recently who has an apartment in Williamsburg, that these kind of things happen because you set them up, right? You put this minefield out there and you make it happen. So thank you so much for that inspiration. And obviously that's something, by the way, I highly recommend, I mean, especially if you're at the moment like on job search or career search or so, to do exactly these kind of things where it's literally kind of sending an email to someone you admire, like via LinkedIn or something, right? The in-mail function, you can send emails, you can send messages to people you don't know yet. You can say how much you like inspired by them and would love to get in touch and so on. And surprisingly often these things work out, right? And I think Matan, in your life, it has proved, in my life too, that works a lot of times. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And with this, we're coming to our last kind of, Yusuf, I see you're back, welcome back. And you were kind of telling us about how you in Tanzania were reframing the context and really kind of trying to understand how to go about this. Welcome back.
Thank you, Christian. Yeah, so I was just sharing a story of how we've been able to to build a workshop, and we started with just 10 wooden poles, but starting with what we have and being able to believe in kind of have that expectation that something's going to happen, and somehow it happens. So we've seen this with the young people that we work with. Things have been happening in their lives. A young man starting with nothing, out of school, dropped out of school, and has no money, has no certificate, college certificate, and starts from scratch and builds a company that employs over 20 other young people and earns, we have one who is earning close to like 40,000 USD per year, and started from scratch. And we've seen these things happening, and that's the kind of work we are doing. And one of the things I've learned from Marlene and the team at our labs and the network we have is giving people hope, and helping people to believe in themselves makes such a big difference. So starting with what we have opens doors for more things to happen in our lives. So that's what we are doing here in Tanzania with our labs. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you so much, Yusuf, for being with us. And I really liked, I mean, the first conversation we have where you were talking about how, you get on the bicycle and you keep cycling. And I found that extremely inspiring, how you keep cycling and cycling, and that tenacity that is extremely inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing this. And that obviously goes into physics, right? That like that entropy thing of how essentially you need to get momentum into the universe to then have potential dots connect, because essentially once you are on that bike, you see a lot of new things that came your way. So thank you so much, Yusuf. So with this, in terms of, there's a lot of people to thank around the book. Of course, like the team at Penguin, will do a kind of, so at the moment, we will have the kind of international launch in September. Now the book is available in the US and in Canada. Thank you so much to everyone who has been part of this journey, who's here with us today. And in general, it's been a learning journey. I think we're all kind of trying to see how this can play out in different environments, in different contexts. And I'm really looking forward to engaging more on this. And I'd love to kind of close with, I think being the philosophical German I have to close on a philosophical note, and I'm really closing with one of my favorite kind of thoughts, which comes from Goethe and Viktor Frankl, who essentially had that idea that if you take someone as they are, you make them worse, but if you take someone as who they could be, you make them capable of becoming who they can be. And I believe that philosophically is at the core of the serendipity mindset, to say it's one thing to take life as a given and to take everything as a given, but as we're seeing throughout history, the most beautiful things for us individually, but also for society, come out of really seeing potentiality in what could be, and then creating that kind of new reality and being part of it. And I hope that especially at the moment, you know, with everything that's going on in the world, all of us can be part of shaping that world and seeing that potentiality and really building that into societal structures, building that into educational structures, and building that into our own lives, and hopefully having smart luck in the process. And with this, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much to the panelists who were with us, and thank you so much, Michelle and the CGA team, for being such a wonderful home for this work and being embracing of the slightly, you know, I mean, this is work that obviously, you know, it has taken quite a few years to get into, like, anchored into kind of research bits and pieces. And so it's really a journey that kind of tries to bridge academia and practice. And so I'm very grateful to be at a place where that kind of bridge is possible. So thank you so much to CGA also for doing this. And thank you everyone for joining us.